This is another exciting episode 26 of that podcast that you would certainly like to come to in case you want to talk to me or hear my viewpoints on a lot of subjects. This is episode 26 of Krocking, Locking and Dropping with the K-Rock. That's right, I'm the Krocking, I'm the Locking and the Dropping, and I'm the K-Rock. Yes, indeed. And folks, I gotta tell you what, I had a podcast planned out last week where I was going to be talking about the suspension of Danico Autry for the Houston Texans, who had actually gotten suspended 6 games due to performance-enhancing drugs, even though he wasn't really aware that the thing that he was taking actually was a banned substance, and that was something that should have been pinned on the doctors to tell him, or maybe check with the NFL to say, hey, look, I'm taking this. Is this an actual are there any banned substances here and everything? And also the fact that he already accepted that suspension and said that he was going to serve a 6-game suspension. But I really felt like, from what I was reading on that, he didn't necessarily he should have at least appealed it. Like, he should have appealed the suspension and all that. So I had my thoughts on that whole Danico Autry situation. And then I was going to talk about the Astros trade deadline, what they did, how I didn't necessarily agree with trading up some of the best prospects, but I feel like this is an opportunity where if you feel like you have another chance to go after another appearance in the ALCS or a World Series ring, then you got to make some tough trades and everything. I know a lot of fans were very upset about that. I was upset about it at first. Of course, I had to talk to my brother about this, and he kind of gave me at least a perspective that I think is a little bit more fair. I was going to give out my thought process on that. I had a podcast planned out. Everything seemed to be going real well. But then I tested positive for COVID-19. Yes, for the first time since COVID-19 came into existence, I tested positive for COVID-19. Now, I am doing better. I have tested negative, so I spent the last 5 days in my apartment just kind of, wearing out the virus and the flu and what have you. And I actually took a COVID test today, and it came out negative, so I'm very relieved to know that my whole thing with COVID-19, at least for this round, is officially over. And it's kind of crazy, I'm usually not the kind of person that gets sick a lot. Now, that's not to say that I haven't gotten sick in my entire life. I've had cases where I've had the virus, or I've had the cold. I've had, cases where I vomited a lot growing up. I mean, I was really sick. I had fever and everything. So, yeah, I mean, I've been sick before. But really, throughout my entire childhood growing up in high school or elementary to high school, I rarely was sick. I was the Cal Ripken Jr. when it came to perfect attendance in school. I was often there, more or not. Me not being there in school was a rare occasion and everything. But, yeah, it did happen once or twice during my school days. But I am glad to know that COVID-19, yeah, I mean, the whole thing with COVID-19 is, it's still a big deal. I mean, we've kind of gotten a better handle on it, although there does seem to be a bit of an outbreak of it at this point. So I did test positive for COVID-19. But what happened was my parents and we had went to West Texas last week, or not last week, but 2 weeks ago. And I came back home early to my parents' house. My parents came back Saturday. And then later that night, they found out that they had tested positive for COVID. So I did everything I could to stay as far away from them as possible, but it wasn't really enough. I went back to Beaumont on Sunday, went to work on Monday, went to work on Tuesday, and then I got a text from my brother saying, hey, are you feeling okay? Because, everybody, mom and dad obviously still have COVID-19 and everyone's getting a test. He had tested negative, and so I said, okay, I need to test. Make sure I'm doing all right. So I decided to go get a COVID test, or at least I tried to get a COVID test from a pharmacist, but I wasn't able to. So I figured, okay, well, I'm feeling fine, so I'm going to be okay. But later that day I started to kind of feel some of these symptoms, a running nose, and I just feel a little some pains in my muscles and everything and all that. And I went to sleep that night thinking maybe it's going to go away tomorrow. Complicating that, I had to go to a doctor's appointment to donate some blood for another issue. So I didn't want to, I didn't want to go there if I had COVID-19. And the following morning, I just wasn't really feeling well, and I was really worried because my mom and I were supposed to meet up for a doctor's appointment that day, but I told her, look, I'm not feeling particularly well. I don't know if it's COVID and everything, but I'm just not sure. And she said, look, just cancel the appointment and then just go get a COVID test and see. So I did. I canceled the doctor's appointment. I went to a Walgreens. I bought one of those at-home COVID tests. I had read that there had been some sort of mixed reviews on that and everything. So I bought a COVID at-home test. I went to work, but I decided to do the at-home COVID test at my office. And I took it, and there were 2 lines, so that meant I tested positive. So unfortunately, I had to leave work early. And from Wednesday until today, Sunday, as of this podcast, I ended up, being here. I haven't left my apartment doors. I had to eat as much as possible, some peanut butter, chips, and cheese, and also some one of those frozen burritos that I got and everything. So I definitely, and then of course I had some water with me and some soda as well, so just to keep me company. But I did have a little bit of issues, just trying to stay calm and all that, because man, getting a cold is one thing, but getting COVID-19, it just sucks, and not being able to go to work and all that, because the hardest part is, and this is something that I need to address with y'all. The hardest part is we are actually approaching another sports season at Lamar University. And so Lamar University's sports season is getting ready to start, and I'm just trying to help set up. Our first game is not until Tuesday, as of this podcast, but I'm trying to set everything up, and I feel like I missed out on an opportunity to help out. So fortunately, I was able to get as much done as I could around here. So I do need to get back to work and just make sure I have everything straightened up. I mean, I should have everything ready to go for soccer on Tuesday at this point. So, but yeah, the last few days I was out with COVID-19. So if any of y'all were following me and you were wondering, hey, why haven't I put out a podcast yet? This is why. So I unfortunately did test positive for COVID-19. I am doing better. Again, I tested negative today. So it was on a Wednesday when I tested positive. So I waited 5 days. 5 to 10 days is kind of usually the wait time for the symptoms to go away. But I ended up testing negative today, so I'm very happy and can't wait to get back to work and get ready to get the season started. So, all that being said, some of the opportunities for my thoughts on the podcast, or that I was planning on doing, have been put to the side, because actually what I wanted to talk about today, I wanted to talk about the Hall of Fame enshrinement ceremony, particularly with Andre Johnson. And Andre Johnson, who became the first Houston Texans player ever, the first official Houston Texans player ever to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Now, I know that Ed Reed did play for the Texans, but that was a one-year deal. And Tony Baselli, who was another Hall of Famer, he was on the Texans squad in 2002, but he didn't really play as much. So he really wouldn't have counted as an official Houston Texan. But Andre Johnson, who spent multiple seasons with the Texans, the very first Houston Texans player inducted into the Hall of Fame. And when I found out that he had been inducted, or he was going to be inducted back in February, I was really excited because, the guy had put up so great numbers. I mean, when you look at his career, he led the NFL in receiving twice. But what was special about that was he became one of 3 players to lead the NFL, or to go back-to-back years leading the NFL in receiving yards and receptions. And he actually joined Jerry Rice and Calvin Johnson, who are also Hall of Famers, mind you, in that exclusive club. And so Andre Johnson definitely getting into the Hall of Fame was a big deal, not only for me, but also for Houston Texans fans, because now we can officially say we have someone in Canton, Ohio, with a bust in the Hall of Fame. And so we're very excited for that, very happy indeed, and hopefully, well, not I say hopefully, but it's not going to be the case. He won't be the only one. J.J. Watt's going to get in a few years, and then assuming how things play out with this current Texans team, the Texans are actually going to get more Hall of Famers down the line. But yes, every one of the 32 teams has a Hall of Famer, and that is something that the NFL should be really proud of, and this is a big win for the Houston Texans as well. Now, I want to talk about Andre Johnson and what his Hall of Fame induction means for everyone. And, I wanted to kind of talk about the kind of athlete that he was, because I noticed a common trend when it comes to Houston sports athletes, at least for the most notable ones, and that is something that we're going to be talking about as well. And so we're going to step aside for a little bit. When I come back, I'm going to give my thoughts on Andre Johnson's induction ceremony, and stay tuned. We'll be right back. So a pretty big weekend for the Houston Texans, which actually started on Thursday because they were selected to partake in the Hall of Fame game, the first preseason game of the season against the Chicago Bears. And of course, Andre Johnson was one of 7 players inducted into the Hall of Fame. It was Andre Johnson, it was Devin Hester, Julius Peppers, Patrick Willis, Randy Gradishaw, Dwight Freeney, and then, of course, Steve McMichael. And let me just say this about Steve McMichael real fast. Obviously, the guy should have been in the Hall of Fame a while back, but given the circumstances which he is currently battling ALS, watching him, receiving his bust, even though he wasn't there, they actually did the ceremony for him in his home in Chicago. And I didn't realize he was actually born in Houston, and was also a University of Texas grad. So, man, it's really remarkable. But just seeing him in the condition that he is in, with some of his former teammates, his wife was there. She was actually representing him throughout the entire couple of days leading up to it, and it was really interesting just to see Steve McMichael, receiving his buzz despite him being in the condition that he's in at this moment. Really great tribute, great thing that the NFL, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, was able to do. Mad props to them as well. So that's just my thoughts on that as well. So there was that, and then there was also the introduction of the new kickoff rules. Now, the kickoff rules, basically, kind of hard to give you a picture of it at this moment, or just to describe it, but basically what it is the NFL is basically trying to do this to promote more returns and also, make sure that there is no more touchback rule situations and everything. So what it is basically the kicker is the only one on the other side that kicks off to the returner, at least one returner, who will try to, he has to catch the ball in what is known as a landing zone, which I think is like the first 10 or 20 yards from the goal line onward. If he catches the ball within that area, he can take off. But if the ball goes in the end zone, then it's just a touchback and everything. And so what happens is you have the kick returner who is right behind his blockers, but they're about 5 yards from the opposing team's onward attackers trying to stop them. So what you have here is basically all the other defenders are on the other side, and Yeah, look, it's really hard for me to explain it. Talking about this, you'll have to watch it for yourself and everything. But I can honestly tell you that from my perspective, I thought I think we're going to need a couple more games to get used to this just because it just seems kind of weird, like some type of XFL kind of rules and everything. I understand the NFL is trying to make sure they prevent from all these vicious hits on these kickoff returns and everything, and also prevent a lack of returns because most of the kicks are becoming more like touchbacks here and there, which doesn't increase time and everything. But when you talk to head coach D'Amico Ryans, he was a little more concerned because there were a number of violent hits in the preseason game, and I can definitely agree watching some of those clips. I'm starting to wonder if the kickoff rule, as much as they have the right idea to try to prevent serious injuries from there, if it needs more tweaking out. Because I feel like when it comes to kickoffs, there's really no way that you can prevent all these injuries. Now, it's going to take some time, don't get me wrong. I think it will take some time, and I do think the NFL will ultimately, need to get that figured out as soon as possible. Just some tweaking out everything, but you're never going to really have that perfect rule in advance. So that's kind of the way I look at that whole thing. So, but yeah, the Texans and the Bears played the Hall of Fame game. The game actually ended in the third quarter because of rain. The Bears ended up winning 21-17, but I was really impressed with the Texans' offense, particularly with Davis Mills, because one of the biggest questions I think fans have is, in case C.J. Stroud gets injured, who's going to be the guy to step up? Can Davis Mills actually be the one to keep the ship afloat until Stroud gets hurt? Because anything the Texans do this season revolves around C.J. Stroud. But what if Davis Mills is able to keep the team afloat on for the time being in the event that Stroud gets injured or misses a couple of games? He missed 2 games last season, and those games were pivotal in a way. But the Texans still made the playoffs, fortunately. But Davis Mills, I thought he did a really great job leading the offense down the field. And most of the starters didn't play. It was really mostly backups and all that. But Davis Mills, even with the guys around him, he seemed to be very efficient with the ball. He was picking apart the Bears defense and everything, and I was really impressed with how he played in a preseason game. Now, of course, I said the backups were playing. I was not impressed with the secondary of the Texans defense. They allowed the Bears to come back, and it was a 30-quarter game because of rain, but I like to think the Texans would have come back to win that game in the fourth quarter. So, obviously, it doesn't really count, but there were some good impressions, but there were not so good impressions about the Hall of Fame game as well. So that brings us to the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. So Andre Johnson, who, mind you, is not the most vocal of athletes, and this is kind of the thing that I was really curious to see of what he could really talk about when he was asked to give his speech. Because Andre Johnson, he's not really the guy that likes to talk a lot. Like, he's not a vocal, flashy person in a way. He's just like the quiet kid. And he made a point about this. Like, when he was giving out his speech, he was making a reference to his hometown of Miami, Florida, because we all know Miami is where he's from. And, Miami has had a tradition of great football players coming up there, particularly at the University of Miami where he went to college. He was on the 2001 Miami Hurricanes squad, which is arguably the greatest college football team ever assembled. And you can, look at the numbers and see why. But Andre Johnson talked about how, when you grow up in Miami, there were some people that were very concerned about him just because he wasn't really talking a lot. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with him not talking. I guess he grew up in a very humble environment, even though he was raised by a single mother who raised him along with his younger brother. And he just kind of made it a point where he was saying, I thank the people of Miami and, for keeping an eye on me and keeping concern for me, growing up. And I just want to let them know that the quiet kid made it into the Hall of Fame. So, yeah, I think they were I guess it was kind of a reference to that. Andre Johnson grew up, as a good kid, even though he was not the most vocal of athletes throughout, his time in his career, whether it was at Miami, whether it was in Houston, or any of the other NFL teams he played for. So, but Andre Johnson, uh, talked about his time at, going to Miami High, which was a different environment than what he was accustomed to. But there was, of course, some things that he was able to make some adjustments in. And then he talked about his time at the University of Miami, where basically the players held a standard. And I think that's one of the things that's really important in all sports. Like, people talk about the coach, having a standard that players have to hold up to, but it's really the players that should, at least at the University of Miami. And, Andre Johnson went to a very historically good college football team, and the players that have been there before, they would always make sure to keep him accountable. And that's the biggest important thing in the NFL, because Andre Johnson had to learn the accountability from the past players, which led him to be very successful at Miami and also in the NFL. So Andre Johnson, of course, definitely enjoyed his time there because of the challenges that he had to face. That there was really no pressure, except there was the pressure of living up to the standard that the players had bestowed upon this program and bestowed upon him in particular. And so Andre Johnson was able to do that. And then, of course, being drafted to Houston, which at the time was an expansion team, and they needed someone to kind of kickstart the franchise and take him to a level that, they never would have envisioned going to, which it took a while. It took him and another coach, Gary Kubiak, who, by the way, was his presenter, to be able to bring the Texans to the playoffs as well. Now, there were, of course, some very tough years where Houston had gone from a pretty bad team to a 500 team, where they could have made the playoffs in one particular year, but they were unable to. But, Andre Johnson, with his career in Houston, he was able to help get that Texans to a level of respectability. Now, of course, that franchise has not been able to get to the AFC Championship game, let alone the Super Bowl. But it's definitely proven that they have been to the playoffs, and they are looking for some tremendous success. And so I definitely liked Andre Johnson's induction speech, where he was really giving all the credit to everyone else. And a lot of people have this tendency to take all the credit and blame everyone else for their failures, which that's never the case with Andre Johnson. He's just humble. He's just soft-spoken. But tell you what, if you were in the locker room, and I'm not saying I was in the locker room, but if you were in the locker room and if there was a point where Andre Johnson wanted to say something, everyone shut the hell up and listen to what he had to say, because Andre Johnson was definitely a leader, even if he was a quiet leader. So a very historic day for Andre Johnson to be inducted into the Professional Football Hall of Fame. Now, this has led me to think about something else in particular, as I said earlier. When it comes to athletes, I think there's a perception from the fans, the media, everyone else around the league, that these athletes have to be very vocal. They have to be very respectful. They have to say some things that stir things up, that stir the pot, cause some drama and all that. And then, of course, they have to back it up. But I feel like with some of our Houston athletes, now we have our fair share of those, for sure, but the greatest Houston athletes that we have had usually are on the opposite side. They're the most humble, they're the most quiet, reserved. They don't talk a lot. They just keep to themselves. But when they do talk, everyone listens, and it's very important. They're the ones that let the actions do their talking and everything. And I think of all the athletes, there's three that stand out. Obviously, Andre Johnson being one. You then have Hakeem Olajuwon as another athlete. And then, of course, Jose Altuve. Arguably the three best players in the city of Houston, who are also the three best players in their franchise's history. I don't think there's any argument about that. And yet, it's so crazy how they're the kind of people that don't say a lot. They are humble. They come from, they all come from different, similar backgrounds where, not the most, not the most brilliant of uprisings and everything, but certainly they worked hard to develop into the athletes that they became and the legends that they became. And oftentimes that has led them to some criticisms from different media members for different reasons. Now, when you think back to Hakeem Olajuwon, he is one of the most nicest, humble gentlemen you will ever meet. But people tend to forget that early in his NBA career, he had a real massive temper. If you remember the 1986 Western Conference Finals game between the Rockets and the Lakers, the Rockets won the series in 5 games thanks to Ralph Sampson hitting arguably the ugliest looking shot in the history of the NBA. But Hakeem Olajuwon actually got ejected from the game, and he had gotten into a scuffle with future Lakers general manager or Mitch Kupchak, who is no longer with the team, but Mitch Kupchak was definitely someone that tried to get under Hakeem's skin, and of course Olajuwon made him pay, but got himself ejected in that game in the process. And then there were other times where Hakeem was just so temperamental and frustrated and upset. Part of the reason was that the Rockets, after their first finals appearance in his time in 1986, they couldn't get back to the Western Conference Finals, and then they went through a period where they would make the playoffs and lose in the first round, which had to be more frustrating. Then there was behind the stuff court scenes or off-court situations where Hakeem wanted to be paid, but there was some tension between him and the Rockets ownership at the time and the general manager. Got to the point where one time Hakeem Olajuwon actually injured himself, and the ownership didn't agree with that in the sense, and they actually suspended Hakeem without pay. And that, of course, was what led Hakeem to say, you know what, I can't take this anymore, I want to leave. And a lot of people think that Michael Jordan's retirement was the reason the Rockets won the 2 championships, but it was actually Hakeem Olajuwon staying with the Rockets that was the big reason why Houston won those 2 championships. If he actually gets traded and he leaves, Houston does not have championships in the NBA. Let's be honest here. The reason why the Rockets won those 2 championships was because Hakeem Olajuwon stayed in Houston. And I think we need to come to that realization. That's the biggest what if as far as we're concerned. But, Olajuwon stays, of course. There was a 14-hour flight from Houston to Japan for the Rockets where they were going to play an exhibition game up in Tokyo, Japan. And they had a conversation, the team and Hakeem, and they both came to the realization that they needed each other. And, that was really a change of events and everything. So Hakeem ended up staying, and not only that, but he was a devout Islamic faith athlete, and that's what I really, respect about him, because he definitely calmed himself down as a person when he rededicated himself to his Islamic faith. And if it wasn't for the fact that there was a mosque not nearby the summit or at the time, and also the 14-hour flight from Japan, we're looking at a different story here. So Hakeem Olajuwon is definitely a very humble personality, and that kind of shows you from perspective. But then you look at someone like Jose Altuve. He grew up in Venezuela. He didn't sign an extension contract as well, and he has been a true heart icon in the city of Houston. Now, his legacy is complicated because of everything that happened in 2017, but I still, to this day, say it wouldn't have made a difference. But I think that whole thing hardened him as a person because, he used to be a very charismatic, lovable, enjoyable person to be around, and he still is in the city. But to the outside viewer, there's still that feeling of, man, this guy, he was responsible for all this and that. Like, he should have done something to stop all that, but he didn't. But then it's almost like, isn't that go against his form of leadership? Like, he's not really a very vocal person or emotional person. I mean, there was a recent video clip of him getting ejected over a controversial call, and he was expressing his frustration, but, that's just who he is as an athlete. Like, he's very calm, he's very humble, But, he's like the Pablo Sanchez. He's a quiet personality, but anytime you get him up to the plate, he can strike and he can hit a clutch home run and kill you in the hearts of everyone that wants to beat him. And he has definitely fought through a lot of adversity, especially as of late, for sure. And I think fans should come to the realization of what a great player he is and that he wasn't responsible for all this. And, he should end up getting in the Hall of Fame. Now, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge given everything that he's had to endure, but I could sit here and say there have been some athletes that have done some pretty controversial things and they are ended up in a Hall of Fame. So that's just the way I look at it. But then, with Andre Johnson, it's just, growing up as a very humble kid and everything, and he's definitely, been quiet. But of course, when you think back to his career, the one thing that that stands out, not just the great catches or the incredible performances he put up against teams, but the iconic fight with him and Cortland Finnegan, who has been one of the biggest pests in the history of the NFL, and Andre just whooped his you-know-what in that moment. And, I mean, Cortland deserved it. Don't get me wrong. He deserved it because, he had been pesting on everybody for such a while, and yet nobody really knew, was willing to do that, or they were just afraid to make that move. Of course, Andre Johnson finally said enough is enough. And the funny story about that was, well, there's two stories that come from that moment. The first one was after the game, he and another teammate went to a Houston Rockets game that night, and they gave him a standing ovation. And that's when the fans, that was really cool. Like, hey, you get yourself into a fight against someone that has really deserved to get his, what kicked, and you get a standing ovation from the fans that same night at a Rockets game. Man, that makes you a legend as well. And then the other thing, he was he got fined for that fight. Like, it was surprising that he didn't even get suspended for a game or two for that fight. But he actually got fined like $25,000 or something like that. And yet, he said that he didn't even know how the fine got paid. Because there has been stories around that some of his peers said, hey, don't worry, we'll take care of it, we'll pitch in our fair amount, and then we'll make sure that you get that fine paid and taken care of. So, but yeah, so he didn't have to pay a fine. Like, it was paid for him. So that was kind of interesting to show the amount of respect. Whether they were very respectful of Andre Johnson, they liked him as a receiver, as a person, or they just weren't fans of Cortland Finnegan and wanted to help out. That's just respect. I mean, that was very classy in a way. So you think back to all those moments that I just talked about, and you say to yourself, what is it really good to have athletes that are very quiet and humble? I mean, when you think about another sports city, let's say Chicago, and I think about Michael Jordan and I think about Walter Payton. They were two of the best athletes for their teams, best athletes in their franchise history for sure. And they were both very, like, Michael Jordan was very outgoing. Like, he could talk trash. He was very competitive in a way, and he always backed it up for sure. And, he was out in the community. Now, of course, some people have questioned his character, and some people say he's like a psychopath for all the things that he's done. But, that's just Michael Jordan being a competitive person, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it shouldn't take away from his GOAT status, obviously. And by the way, Michael Jordan was at the Hall of Fame ceremony. He was just there to honor Dwight Freeney and Julius Peppers. Of course, Julius Peppers was a North Carolina guy, played on the basketball team in the Final Four in 2000. So I thought that was a very interesting fact. But Michael Jordan, it was a very competitive guy. Walter Payton, I mean, he had some charisma about him as well. I mean, you hear some of the stories. Like, he wasn't as much of a trash talker as Michael Jordan was, but he did have some charisma about him. He was always making appearances and just, was very beloved by the nation for him as a player and as a personality. And, yeah, he was definitely a great, figure in the sports world. And so that's kind of gotten me to thinking, I mean, there's definitely pros and cons about being a very quiet, humble athlete. Because on one hand, you don't get into as much controversy as maybe say somebody that talks a lot and says something to stir up drama, and then of course go out and back it up as a way to kind of entertain yourselves, for the fans' entertainment in a way. You're also a very good athlete. You focus on your goals and everything, and you have that kind of respect. But at the same time, you don't typically market yourself in that way as, maybe somebody else. Like Hakeem Olajuwon had a shoe that he was trying to sign, and he was hoping to pick up the finances to donate it to a charity that he was running. But as it turned out, Michael Jordan with his Air Jordans brand just killed him in the market. And it's just because of the fact that it was Michael Jordan. And I think there's definitely pros and cons with being a great athlete. Like I said, being a quiet athlete is one thing. I guess it just depends on the personality you are. Michael Jordan had a chip on his shoulder, and yet he's been very competitive ever since. Hakeem Olajuwon, he didn't start playing basketball until he was 16, and of course like, I don't know if he would have been a very good personality or a good athlete if he wasn't as, humble as he was. I don't know if Andre Johnson would have been the great receiver that he would have been if he wasn't as vocal. Because when you think of great wide receivers, Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Chad Ochocinco, they talk a lot of trash. Let's just put it out there, folks. And then, so they're definitely some of the best trash talkers out there. I mean, Andre Johnson isn't like that. Andre Johnson is like the rare exception to that rule. And then, of course, Altuve, he was very charismatic for a while, but then, of course, the whole thing has kind of hardened him, and I think he's kind of earned him a reputation as sort of the Pablo Sanchez, not the most quiet of people, but still very lovable among the fans. I mean, yeah, he celebrates with his teammates, and it shows his affection and emotions out there whenever a home run is hit or the team wins. But, that's just kind of his personality. And I don't know if it's necessarily because of the sports market that they played in. Like in Chicago, Chicago's a bigger sports market than Houston, obviously. But it just makes you wonder if any of these athletes, prefer, I guess the bigger market you are, is there an expectation to, if you're playing in a big market, is there an expectation that you have to be boisterous and be talkative, say some things to stir up the pot because you're playing in a big market? Whereas if you were playing in a medium-sized market, you have, there's no pressure. Obviously, they want to win, but there's no pressure to say anything because it's just the way, it's kind of has that small town vibe to it or so. Or I don't know what it is. I just think maybe it just depends on the athlete as well. I mean, because, we could say that Andre Johnson is completely the opposite of what someone like C.J. Stroud is. Now, C.J. Stroud's humble, but he has had his fair share of times where he's said some things that has rubbed others, maybe the wrong way. But that's just the competitive side of him, and he has an opportunity to back up some of his claims and everything. And, Stephon Diggs has this reputation of being a diva and everything, and to this point he hasn't really said anything that has earned him, that has lived up to the expectations of a diva. I know there was that fight, but he got himself involved, even though he wasn't shoving around and pushing people. But I just think there's nothing wrong with being a quiet athlete. I think being a quiet athlete is good. I think it may not be necessarily enough to get the big bucks or get people to draw the attention unless they were diehard sports fans and they saw you play and they gave you much respect. But I just think, it prevents you from, it keeps you grounded. Like, it keeps you from being able to say some very controversial things. And I think that's where society is lacking in today. Now, there's nothing wrong with talking trash. There's nothing wrong with saying all that, but you got to back it up and you also got to deal with the negative consequences if you say something that's very controversial, and you also, if you can't back it up. So that's just kind of my 2 cents worth on it. But as far as I'm concerned, I think it's okay to have a quiet athlete. And the fact that Houston's three best athletes, arguably, now you can obviously say J.J. Watt, maybe the best Texans player ever, and he's a little more charismatic than Andre Johnson is. But I think the fact that Houston's had this reputation of having these quiet athletes still go out there and dominate the sports they play and be among the best really shows a lot. And I think it really showed the rest of the country as well that, hey, there's no right way or wrong way of going about your business on the playing surface. And Andre Johnson is definitely a proven example of that. And I don't know, that 15 minutes might have been the most he's ever talked, in anything for that matter. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the second closest was when he was inducted into the Ring of Ceremony or the Ring of Honor by the Texans and everything. And yeah, definitely great to see a guy being able to express himself and also express his thanks to everyone that had supported him and put him out in the, to making him the man that he is at this moment. But Andre Johnson is definitely a Texans legend for sure. And very happy that he is inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the place that he deserves to be there. And for right now, that's the Texans Super Bowl. And until they do win a Super Bowl, this is the biggest moment in Texans history. Seeing somebody, one of the Texans, being able to make it to the ultimate of the ultimate, the elite of the elite, the greatest of the greatest. And Andre Johnson's bust has been put in the hall. I have never been to Canton, Ohio. I do want to go there one day. That's one of the few places I do want to go. I have been to Cooperstown. I have been to Springfield, Massachusetts for the Basketball and Baseball Hall of Fame. But I want to go to Canton, Ohio for that matter. So that's definitely a trip I would hope to make one of these days. So congratulations once again to Andre Johnson. We love you as Houston fans, and we will definitely can't wait to enjoy some more memories with you watching the franchise as the team looks to take that next step for this upcoming season. And we are going to end it right here, folks. Not really much to talk about, considering that I had just gotten out. I had just been cleared of COVID-19, and I'm definitely feeling better. So again, folks, it's definitely going to be a little bit tricky for me to get these podcasts out at this point because of my work schedule and everything. But don't worry, I will try to get at least one out per week if I can. But in the meantime, you guys can subscribe to podbean.com as well as Spotify, and also my YouTube channel at KWCLANE91, where you will be able to watch this podcast as well. So thank you very much for tuning in, guys. I hope you guys have yourselves a great day. Make sure if you get COVID to stay isolated and make sure you get better. And I will see you guys next time on this podcast, Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock.